what I want to talk about at first here is question 22. And what I want to make sure is that people really understand this, what this question really means. I want to make sure that before this being the last lecture, I want to make sure that when people leave this class that they understand what's going on. I think some people I can see understand it, some people I'm not sure, and I think it's an important point. This is from question 22. This is the monopsony. So this is question 22. What is a monopsony? I want to understand, if you understand very clearly what is going on here. One of the things, and what I'd like you to do is to come up to the board. Come up to the board and explain what various things mean here. So if you can, if you can please come up to the board. And the first thing that I want is what I'm looking for. Yes.
I will read the question of 22.
Yeah, that's what the monopsony. Yeah, to explain clearly what a monopsony is. And so the first thing what I want you to do is talk about if the firms in the market are perfectly competitive, what is the shape? When is this a marginal cost curve, and when is this not a marginal cost curve? That's what I want you to explain. With this is a supply curve. Okay, it's a supply curve. Under certain conditions, it represents the marginal cost, and other conditions it does not represent the marginal cost, depending upon whether the firm on the other side of the trade is perfectly competitive or has market power. Right? And I want you to explain that. Try to do it. That is a supply curve. So it is a supply curve. Okay. Now, let's say in the first instance the firm that is, so this is the willingness of a fact. So this is a factor, some factor input. Let's call it labor. So it's a labor supply curve. So let's call it the amount of labor. So if the firm is perfect, if the firms that are buying in the labor market, that are buying labor, perfect competition, and market power. If it is perfect competition, is this or is this not the supply curve represent the marginal cost curve?
If it is a perfect market, this is not a supply curve for the labor. In the perfect market, the firm cannot set the price.
Right, the firm can't, but that could still be the industry supply curve.
Yeah, this should be the industry.
Correct. Right, but I'm saying is that if it's perfect competition, if the firms are perfectly competitive, they can still face, the industry can still face an upward sloping supply curve for labor. That's perfectly possible. They can have, each firm may face this supply curve. They may see this supply curve. So no matter what the size of their output, but for the industry, the total amount that the industry is willing to supply can be upward sloping. That's what I'm saying. So now, what I'm saying is under a certain condition, Under which condition does this represent the marginal cost? Does the marginal cost?
If the firm is a monopolist,
Yes.
then the firm represents the industry.
Correct.
So he can change his needs for the labor and the price for the salary will
So how does that affect the marginal cost?
If the firm wants to lower for example, if this is the equilibrium point, if the firm wants to...
Don't worry about equilibrium.
Yeah.
Let's not worry about equilibrium. Let's just worry about the marginal cost curve.
If the firm wants to give less salary to the labor, they just hire less people and let them do more work.
So what is that? So what is the marginal cost? What does the marginal cost curve look like?
The marginal cost...
Is this the marginal cost curve?
This is the marginal cost curve.
That's what my point is. It's not.
It's
not. It's not the marginal factor cost curve. That's the point. That's the point I want to make to you. Is that if the firm has market power, this is not the marginal factor cost curve, because that means that the firm has control over their marginal cost. If they are if the buyers are perfect competition, then it represents their marginal cost, because they can't control it. That's part of what the lack of control. Do you see the difference?
No.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Well, this is I've been thinking about. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay. Here's what I'm saying. The supply curve can be the marginal cost. It's the marginal, the willingness. It's the willingness to supply. It's the willingness to supply. So if the buyers are in perfect competition, they have no control over the amount of labor that the entire industry supplies. They have no control over it. So their marginal cost, as the quantity of labor that the industry produces, it increases. But they can't control it. So this represents, do you recall that the supply curve can be a marginal cost curve?
Yeah.
Remember that. The supply curve can be a marginal cost, but it's only a marginal cost curve under perfect competition. Do you see the point?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, under market power, show me the marginal factor cost curve. This is the fact. Now, I have market power, and now I'm facing an upward sloping supply curve. Okay. This is what I want you to do: is keep clear. This is where you keep clear what the concepts are. I'm not saying that this is easy to understand. You know, this is a very subtle point. I was thinking about this and realizing that this is a point that I want to make clear. Now, this buyer of the labor.
Yeah.
The buyer of labor has this supply curve. What's their marginal factor cost curve?
This, it should be a constant number.
No.
Marginal, it should be the derivative.
Right.
No?
But the change, it's just like marginal revenue. Okay, here's a demand curve. Here's a demand curve. That's a marginal revenue curve. That's the marginal revenue curve. That is the derivative. It's still that's the derivative. That's the derivative.
Marginal cost for labor.
Yeah. The margin, in other words, what's as for the factor of labor. So this firm has market power in the factor input.
Yeah.
We're not worried about whether it has market power in the output market. We're just worried now about the input market.
Marginal cost for every.
They can control.
It for any constant number, I think. For any constant number that the firm set.
No.
No.
And the reason, remember, they can control the labor.
Yeah.
If they can control the labor, then that can't be their marginal cost. That can't be the marginal factor cost. It looks something like that. That's the point. That's their marginal factor cost. That's their marginal cost. And we say factor cost because we're focused on the factor of labor. That's their marginal cost for labor. So it's more steep in the same way. And this is why I was thinking about this. And I wanted to make, because I was looking at people's answers and it wasn't clear that that was clear to you. So that's why I want to make this clear. I wish that, Dominic, I want you to watch this. I want you to watch this video. You got to watch this video. I want that to be clear. So I'm sorry he's not here, but hopefully he'll come later. There's something that was not clear. That is the marginal factor. That's the marginal factor cost. And think about it the same way as you have a demand curve and a marginal revenue curve for a firm with market power. That's the point. This is their marginal. This is the marginal revenue for a firm with market power. They can control it, which means they can control their marginal revenue. Here they can control their marginal cost. This is the control. This represents the control that they can have on the marginal factor cost. It's more steep than the supply curve. This is more steep. The marginal revenue curve is more steep. This is more steep. That's the control that they can have. And that's why they can, that gives them the market power. That's where their market, in terms of the factor cost, that's where it comes from. And so we're looking at the, so here we've got marginal revenue product of labor. That's their marginal revenue product. So they're going to set marginal revenue product equal to marginal cost. This is the perfect competition outcome. See, that's perfect competition. That's why it's not the marginal cost for the firm with market power is not on that line. You see that? Do you see it now? It's not on this line. That's why this is not a marginal cost. This is why this does not represent the marginal cost curve for a firm with market power, because they can control, because their marginal factor cost varies. They can take the derivative of it because they can control it. The firms with perfect competition, they can't control it. The derivative is zero. The derivative is a constant. For them, the derivative, it's this. They can't control it. But as the amount of labor is supplied, the wages go up. But they're not controlling it. The whole market is just producing that demand. Their demand curve is shifting out, so it can shift up. But here, a firm that's a monopolist that has market power. The firm has more. So this firm, that's what the marginal factor cost is, and their market power comes from, in the monopsonist, from the fact that the marginal factor, that they can control the marginal factor cost. The same way as on the demand side, the firm with market power has control over their marginal revenue. They can control their marginal revenue. The firm without market power can't control their marginal revenue. They have no control over it. But the firm with market power can control their marginal revenue. The firm with market power in the input market can control their marginal cost. This is the marginal cost curve that the firm with market power in the input market faces. For the firms that do not have market power, this represents their marginal cost curve in that factor. But for the firm with market power, this represents their marginal cost curve, because they can control their costs with their output. Firms can't control the cost of their output. So for the firms with no market power, this is their marginal cost curve. See, it's a very subtle difference. I was thinking about this. It's a subtle difference, and it's just important. And as I see, it's the flip side of this. It's the opposite, but it's the same thing. It's the nature of their control. It's the nature of their control over their costs and over their revenue. That's what market power is.
This means the cost increase faster than the marginal cost curve.
Correct. Yes. The marginal factor cost. Yes.
Will
in
that
the same-
be this one?
No.
No?
No. Go back to the diagram. That's the point.
No.
It's exactly, the cost could increase fast, because look, the cost is growing. Look, all you can do is look at it. The marginal is faster. Of course it's faster. That's the point.
Margin.
On the margin, go from here to here. What's the increase? Up here. Here to here. What's the increase? Up here. Here to here. It's up here. It's up. It's always up. It's above. It's above the line. The margin is above the line. See that? You can see it now. It's very subtle, but that's the kind of thing you need to keep in mind when you think about these markets and how these markets work, and what market power really means. What market power really means is that the firms have control over their marginal costs and marginal revenues. That's what market power is. They have control over that. That's more steep. It rises more steep. Go back to the diagram in your. You go back. Let's see. I might. Do I have it? Let's see. Go back and look at that. I might ask you this on the final. Okay, that's why I'm gonna. I want to make sure. And as I say, I'm really unfortunate because these two guys, I really wanted them to be here. I wanted to make sure. I think you can understand this. Do you understand? Does this make sense to you, Eddie?
I don't know.
Why don't you come up and try to explain? Can you please come up, please? There's only three of us here.
Professor,
Yes.
is that possible that we can calculate this?
Sure.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm questioning how can we calculate this?
Oh.
Yeah. If we can calculate the number and we draw the line,
It should look something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll look something like that. Because if that's the marginal cost, this is 0 to 1. Your margin it's going to be above the curve because you've got the total amount and it's multiplied by the total amount. The margin is above. The margin is above that. Is above the supply. The marginal cost curve here. The marginal factor cost curve is above the supply curve. It's above. It rises more steeply. And in the same way that the marginal revenue curve falls more steeply, it's the same thing.
I see.
It's the same. This falls more steeply because it's going to be below the line as the total revenue. Well, so the marginal revenue curve is more steep. The marginal cost, factor cost, rises more steeply. And so that's why. This is why the market power. This is why market power exists. Make sure that you understand this. I'm probably going to ask you something about this on the final. I'm going to want to see that you can explain this. So keep that in mind. There's something about, you can go back and watch this, but I want to make sure that you understand it. If you can understand that, then you'll have a very clear sense in your mind about market power. And that's what I want to make clear to both of you. I appreciate you being here, that you can see. I want when you walk out of here and you run into this problem later in your studies, you'll know that. You won't be confused. You won't be confused by something. You'll know exactly what market power is. And you can explain it to your fellow students. That's hopefully what you can do. You walk out of here. You can understand that's the marginal factor. Go back to the diagram I have.
I see.
Go back to the diagram. You see that? You're starting to see it now.
Yeah.
Okay, now explain that to.
It means the firm should hire this amount of labor
Correct.
and
At that wage.
pay this.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, because they're willing to, they're willing to accept this wage. Now do you see why this can't be the marginal cost curve? It can't be the marginal cost curve for the firm with market power, that is. But it is the marginal cost curve. It represents the marginal cost curve if the firms are if the buyers of labor are competing perfect competition in the labor market. It is their marginal cost curve of the industry as the amount of labor supply changes. But again, they have, if it's perfect competition, they have no control. Market power, they have control. Keep that in mind. I'm probably going to ask something. Okay. Now, let's see. I've got I got all of your work. Thanks for that. And I think you're in good shape. I'm not worried about you. These guys aren't here. Okay. Okay. Let me get started on this. And I will ask some question about this final lecture. So, but beyond the final again. I will have, we'll have the final. What I'd like to do is have it on midnight on, let's say, I'm thinking Friday night, the 2nd. Friday the 2nd. And from midnight, so that'd be midnight on Friday night. So it's 0 hour on Saturday. That should be Saturday the 3rd. Is that, are both of you okay with that? Is that okay?
Well,
What is your schedule and your finals?
final is over on January 30, but
Okay.
I'm going to go to Australia from
Okay.
February 3rd.
Oh, are you going with
Hanako.
Hanako? Okay, so you're going with Hanako. Okay, so that. Okay, because I know she's going. So now I'm giving her when she gets on. I'm writing for the final in her class. I'm giving her that at midnight on Friday night.
Oh.
So that time, and she claims that she's going to be working on that on the trip. Now I know you're going to be with her, and she's telling me that now I know you're going to be flying with her, and she's going to be working. She's going to tell her, "Don't bother me. I got to work on this final." I'd like to see that. But if you have a final too, well, maybe the two of you will be working on your final. So okay. Well, then you're both in the same position.
Yeah.
You're both in the same position. Well, that settles that. Now I don't want to ruin your holiday, but anyway, well you're in the different classes, so you won't have to worry about that. How long will you be there for? What is your schedule?
1 month.
Oh, 1 month. Well, then you're fine. Well, then you're fine. Okay, no worries then. Well, then you can take a few days, and okay, I won't worry about that. Okay, very good. Let me get this. Get started with this lecture. I think it's a lot more clear in your mind. And I was thinking people didn't understand that. I was thinking that people did not clearly understand that. And I think those are very subtle. It's the kind of way of thinking economically, to be able to clearly think to think about all those subtle little things that, and sometimes they can be very subtle. And as I say, one of that is that as I thought about it, I said, I was thinking, I never thought about that, but the marginal cost curves are different depending upon whether it's market, whether the buyer has market power or not. Never thought about it that way. Then I thought, well, that's important. I mean, that's important. I want to make sure that they understand that. So that was the motive. And I looked at the answers, people's answers. I wasn't sure that people understood that. So now we're going to, and now you understand that, and I think you'll understand that. You'll understand it. You don't know the marginal factor cost. I think you'll understand it. You might be struggling a little bit, but I think you're fine. I was concerned about the other students, and they're not here. So they'll get it. Watch the video, guys. Watch the video. You'll keep that hope. Check on the final. You'll be running back to this video, guys. Okay. So here we are. As I appreciate you being here. This I'll have more to say at the end of the lecture. This is our last lecture of the semester. I'm going to talk. I started talking about cities and urbanization, and I'm going to talk a bit about that because I want to you to understand some very clear things about why you observe certain what's the word I'm looking for? Certain patterns in spatial patterns in the say in the urban environment. We can see them. If you recall, we've talked about, for example, market areas, and we've talked about market areas, and we talked about that market areas can circular around. Kind of talked a little bit about that on a line, and you can have a circular market areas. What we're going to talk about. So this is kind of some ideas like this. We're going to think about market areas and ultimately why do cities exist? Because you think, well, why do cities exist? Why don't we just spread out evenly over the planet? Why do we concentrate in cities? People live in about. Cities and urban areas take up about 2% of the total land area in the world in terms of where people could live. In terms of a reasonable land area, it's roughly about 2%. I think that's the figure. So it's it's about 2. I'll confirm that. I'm doing it from memory here, but that's reasonably habitable. Humans live in even though there's lots of 7 billion people, the human population is concentrated in spatially very small areas. So why is that? Why don't they spread out evenly? Why are cities located where they're located? Why aren't they spread out evenly over available inhabitable space? Why are they of cities of different size? Why is there a Tokyo? Why is there a Nagoya? Why is there a Sao Paulo? Why is there a New York? Why is there Cleveland? Why do cities have a different size? All of those have reasons. There's all economic reasons as to why all of those take place. Well, so as I've pointed out here, humans could occupy reasonably. They can occupy no more than about 50% of the Earth's total land area, about 78 million square kilometers, is reasonably inhabitable. About half of it is too mountainous, too dry, too cold. There's places that are not terribly attractive. And you have people that live in some extreme places. As if you've been following the news, Siberia's had some very cold weather, and there's actually people who live in these parts. But in general, very, very few people live there. It's about 3% of the total land area is occupied by housing, or about 4.5 million square meters. So about 4.5 million square meters. And this is a large increase over previous estimates. Now we're able to estimate more clearly because we have the satellite photos and the whole thing. So now we can look and get a pretty good idea of that. And that's about 1,500 people per square kilometer of actual inhabited area. So that's interesting for where people are inhabited, not where, this is not the average over all of the inhabitable area. This is where people inhabit. The density of population is about 1,500 people per square kilometer. Well, 1,500 people per square kilometer would be almost empty in this city. The lowest densities are about 10,000, 10,000 per square kilometer within the city, with the 23 wards of Tokyo. So this is, in general, the density of population. So we can know right away that the density of a city like Tokyo is far greater. We live in a far more dense city than is typical for the average inhabited area on the face of the earth. Now, part of that must be that don't occupy every possible square meter of land, is that land must be reserved to grow the amount of food sufficient to feed such a large population. But another factor, it may be and is to a great extent, is the cost of infrastructure. A modern society with a high living standard requires infrastructure, and in general, at least to this point, that infrastructure is cheaper the more with higher density. And we're talking about sewers, roads, electrical system. Now, I think no matter what, that water systems, sewage systems that are not going to get, there's going to be advantages in concentration. There's going to be advantages in concentration in the roads. Now, some people may argue that this may not be the case for electrical systems. I don't know. I'm skeptical of that. I still think that you're going to have electrical systems where you're delivering large amounts of power over long distances is still going to be around for a while. I still think that there's going to be some advantages in density for a while. Some people think differently. They think we're going to be able to decentralize that. I'm open to that possibility, but at this point I'm not convinced that that's the case. But at any rate, the infrastructure is delivered to a more dense population, lowers the cost per person. But cities have existed for hundreds and thousands of years with little or none of the infrastructure those of us in advanced societies take for granted. Now, you may recall, I talked about Rome last week. Rome had more than 1 million people. They didn't have an electrical system 2,000 years ago in Rome. They did have a sewage system. They did deliver. They did have that. They did deliver running water, especially to higher income people. They did have that infrastructure, but they didn't have a superhighway system. The roads in Rome were very narrow and very congested. They certainly didn't build that, but people clustered together anyway. We didn't have any of we lacked much of the infrastructure. They didn't have a telecommunication system. They didn't have an electrical system. They didn't have any of that. Yet they still concentrated. So, given the rapid expansion of cities that took place in the 19th century, that rapid expansion was made with cities having infrastructure that would be considered primitive by current standards, and yet the densities grew. So why do people live in cities? Well, our discussion, we talked earlier about the relationship between the extent. Did we talk about this? And I'm trying to think if we did. The extent of the market and the degree of specialization. That the more specialization, if there is, the bigger the market, then the more specialization you can have. Because you can have more people that produce more specialized goods that require a bigger market to congregate in one space. And that's the reason why we see around the world, we see financial industry, clusters in major financial centers. We see that the financial industry is heavily concentrated in New York. It's heavily concentrated in London. There's a lot of it in Hong Kong and Singapore, lesser degree in Tokyo. Smaller cities around the world have very little, much less financial services. The movie industry concentrates in Southern California. You can think of media in Japan. It's all in Tokyo. Almost all of the media, any significant media in this country, media, advertising, almost all the advertising, almost all of the heavy concentration of media, magazines, and I'm sure even most of the internet is going to be concentrated here. Even though people can write stuff anywhere, we still have a huge concentration of that. And yet, you do have cities, for example, Nagoya, concentration of automobile production. There's a reason for that. So we're going to revisit this idea about the extent of markets and the degree of specialization that is present. So this describes a firm. No, we did talk about this. Describes a firm as markets too small for it to operate. At the lowest point, at any point on the demand curve, the average total cost is above the demand curve. So this firm that could supply in this market, this means there's insufficient demand. At this output level, the firm loses this much. So there's no incentive to produce. This is an example of a firm that the production of the good is too costly given the size of the market. So as the market gets bigger, what happens? The demand curve shifts out. As the market gets spatially bigger, as the spatial extent of the market, how big in the territory that the market gets, and therefore the bigger the market, that shifts out to the right, and it's more likely that exists. Why do you have, for example, high-quality restaurants in Tokyo? I assure you, if you went to a place like Aomori, you can have you're going to have some good local restaurants, but you're not going to have the degree and the kind of diversity that you would have in the local market here. It's not that you can't get good people. There's some very good food you can get at places like that, but there's a difference. It also has effect of where goods are shipped to. Cities typically, and this has been for hundreds and hundreds of years, are places where the highest quality goods tend to be shipped. The highest quality fruits. You get in the middle of the city tends to have, which is the furthest away from the countryside, and yet sometimes you'll have the best fruits and vegetables in the center of major cities. That was one of the things. The first time when I first went to New York many years ago now, one of the first things I noticed was that the quality of fruits and vegetables were so much higher than almost anywhere else that I've ever been. That it was just much higher quality. Well, you don't grow any of it in New York. It's because the market is so concentrated, the incomes are so high, people are willing to pay more. Again, the demand curve in these places is shifted to the right. So both from the standpoint of firms and households, the cities are attractive places to sell and purchase goods. That's one of the major reasons why cities exist, because because of the market size, and that's one thing that regardless of, it's not going to change. It's not going to change no matter how the changes in retailing, is that a big city is going to be a place with concentrated market. You can ship more goods there. It's easier. There's a bigger market. That is going to exist no matter what kind of changes, Amazon and whatever else that changes in the market. Well, now we ask, well, why are cities located in some places and not in others? And I've said that people are not uniformly spread out over the inhabitable portion of the Earth's surface, but rather are found concentrated in a relatively small portion of that inhabited area. And Ada, you're going to be going to Australia. You'll see this firsthand. I've been there once. That is a truly empty country. It's you go where it's really it's almost empty. And the thing is that when you talk about a place like this, every major city every major city is long, except for Canberra. And Canberra is just the capital. It's kind of an artificial. There would hardly be any. The only reason why it's there is because it's in between Melbourne and Sydney. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere, and they wanted to put the politicians and bureaucrats in a place far away from everybody else. So they did that, and probably so they caused as little damage as possible, so they put them in Canberra. And otherwise, it's all of these cities, all of these major cities, Brisbane to Sydney to Melbourne, Adelaide, are all of, in fact, you see this concentration from Brisbane to Melbourne. This is the large concentration, if you can call it a concentration population. It's all along the coast. Then there's Adelaide, and then way out here is Perth. But all of it, almost all of it along the coast. You can see there's no. These are small towns. Small town. Canberra is of modest size. This is Albury. There, and one of the problems here is that there's no river system. One of the issues here is in terms of water. It's a very dry continent. You've got the Darling River here, the Murray-Darling River in the southeast. This is the only significant river system in the entire huge country. This is as big as the 48 states in the United States. It's huge. It's a huge land area with almost no rivers. Very little population, almost all of that along the coast, very little. The interior is extremely dry. This is the only significant river system. And there's no significant city on this river system. So that is an example. Australia is an example of a country where population's all very, very limited area. It's a huge area, but nobody lives there. There's almost nobody lives there. And I assure you that probably it'd be very difficult for it to have, for example, 200 million people. The United States, on the other hand, is very different. There's a number of major cities, a lot of them along the coast. You've got along the west coast, the Gulf Coast, you've got San Diego, Los Angeles, Bay Area, Portland, Seattle. You've got Houston, New Orleans, you've got all Florida. There, up to the east, the northeast, you've got from Washington to Boston, up there. All of that are major cities along the coast. But this is a country, the United States is a country. You can tell the more red and this blue. These are densities, and you can see all this interior, huge area of the interior of the country with pretty high densities, or at least relatively high. From this eastern half of the country. So lots of people, lots and lots of people. A huge population can live in the interior of this country. The reason is it's physically very different. You've got this Great Lakes system here, one of the largest inland system of lakes in the world. And you've got major cities that exist there, Milwaukee, Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, Buffalo, that exist along these rivers. The lakes. You've got a huge river system, the Mississippi, up here that runs up here, Memphis, St. Louis, up to Minneapolis. Another river system here, the Ohio River, the Missouri River. There's incredible rivers for transportation, to supply water, and ample rainfall. Very different. So physically this has an impact. So physically, we can tell the difference that the United States, because of physically, is very different. And in fact, here is this shows, for example, the Mississippi, the Missouri river systems. That's that Mississippi River, right? That's that huge river. This huge river that flows right in the center of the country, and it drains a gigantic area. This is one of the world's greatest river systems in the entire planet. Is in that area. So the development of this and the rail network complements this vast natural interior waterway system. Much of this, for example, the Mississippi, you can transport. You can have transport all up and down, I think from Minneapolis all the way down. You can have barges and do shipment of large quantities of goods and agricultural products along the Mississippi and good portions of the Missouri and the Ohio rivers as well. So you see, this is all of a huge area. Here's another one. This is some of the greatest concentration of people on the planet in China, eastern China, right? Especially in here. It's very, it has good soils, it has ample rainfall. There's probably almost 1 billion people that live in this area. It's one of the most densely inhabited areas on the face of the earth. And the reason is that it can support a huge number of people. These enormous river systems, here and here. So enormous river system, and I'm not going to try. Yangtze, how do you pronounce Yangtze? I never could pronounce it correctly. Yeah, I know usually we Americans say it even worse, and that goes through Shanghai, or that part.
Jiangxi.
Yangtze?
Jiangxi.
Okay, Jiangxi. The Americans say Yangtze, the Yangtze River. Yangtze, but any rate, this is an incredibly attractive place for people to live. And I've been to a few places in China, and wherever you go, there's just in this massive amounts of people. And I was just looking over just this area by province, and just looking. It's an incredible concentration of cities with the cities in town, with 1 million plus people. They're everywhere. They're everywhere in this part of eastern China. All of that, as I say, very pleasant. The climate is generally fairly mild, especially from in the central and southeastern part. You can have several crops a year, especially in the south. Rice growing, tremendous amount of rice can be grown. This is a very, very attractive, that combination of vast river systems, fertile soils, ample rainfall. It supports one of the greatest concentrations of human population on the entire planet there. So these are some of the reasons. But here, again, you got the western part of the country out here. It's empty. It's desert. Nobody lives there. There's nothing. There's nothing out there here in Xinjiang, and in Tibet there. So there are big areas of China that are empty, and the reason it's not attractive places for people to live. Now Japan is kind of an exception, and the reason is that Japan is kind of different because geographically. It's different. It's an exception to our earlier observation that urban populations cover a relatively small portion of inhabitable areas. Japan has a very, very small percentage of inhabitable areas. This is a very mountainous. It's a very mountainous country. The places that are plains and where people can live is pretty limited. With the biggest area in the Kanto Plain here, where we live, Tokyo, is located. And one of the things that I think I mentioned last week, this wasn't settled really seriously until about after 1600. This was the center of Japan, was here in the Kansai and Osaka and along the Seto Sea. This was historically much of the history of Japan in this part of the country. This is much later. That was significantly settled. But you can just see these very limited. There's Nagoya there, there's Osaka there. I think that's Hiroshima. Is that Hiroshima? Okayama, Hiroshima. Anywhere there's Fukuoka, you can just see there's cities where people can live. It's pretty limited. There's Sendai there. All that, all the mountainous area. Very, very. It's quite a mountainous country. 80% of the mountain of the country is in fact mountainous, in which very few people can live there. So with the exception of Hokkaido, virtually every inhabitable area in Japan of significant size has a relatively large city. This is not normal. This is a very, very heavily populated for a country that really doesn't have a lot of inhabitable area. It's quite a large population, and not surprisingly, Japan can't feed its population based on the agricultural area. So we can easily see that cities vary tremendously in the size of their population. Now, why some cities are larger is more sociology and political science. For example, cities that tend, capital cities that have a lot of central control, that countries with a lot of central control tend to have large, capital cities are large relative to the population. Great example, that's France. France has a very high population. Paris has a very high population. It's a very centralized country. Paris controls a lot of the country. There's a lot of reasons for the businesses, the bureaucrat, government and business, all located in Paris. That's where the action is. To an extent, Tokyo is a little bit like that in Japan, not quite as concentrated. Italy, on the other hand, and this is a very interesting contrast, Italy does not have, its cities are not, Milan is the only city of any real significant size. Italy has a lot of cities, they're not very big. They're by global standards, are not large cities. And people have a very strong local identification. That in France is very different. France is very more of a centralized society. Italy much less, and that's reflected in the size of, to some degree, that's reflected in the size of the cities. France was a country, for example, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, 500-600 years ago. France was a country. In the area that's France now is pretty much a country 500 years ago, even longer. Italy is not a country today. Italy's not really a country today. So that has an impact. There's the political impact. This is the example I talked about France. You can see the concentration. There's Paris. Over 12 million in that metro area. The next pop is Lyon, only 2 million. That's a huge drop-off. That shows you the concentration of population. You just add this up, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The next 6 cities combined are smaller than Paris. The combined are smaller than Paris. Very concentration. United States is very different. United States has much more spread out. New York, Los Angeles are large, but there's other, Chicago is a large metropolitan area. All of those cities have significant population. That's not true in France. Again, very, very centralized population. In contrast, here's Italy, and you can see very similar population. These cities are very similar in size. Actually, I think Milan is actually is a larger city, probably in terms of total metropolitan area. And you can see that Roma occupies a large area, but really Milan is actually a larger city. Here's Japan. We can see this was based on the 2010 census. These are the metropolitan areas of Japan, and you can see it's pretty concentrated. It is kind of, the Kanto, 36, almost 37 million in 20. It's about 37 million now. That's primarily the 4 prefecture. This is the Kanto region and the urban centers, 23 wards. Kawasaki, Yokohama, Chiba, and Saitama-shi. So you can see that. Here's Kansai, about 20 million then it drops off about 9 million in Nagoya, a little bit more than 9 million, the Nagoya metropolitan area. Everything else a lot smaller. So it's quite a bit concentrated. It's quite a bit concentrated there. So there is, especially once you get below Fukuoka, that top 4, you get below that, the cities are a lot smaller, so that shows you the concentration and the reason, to a degree, as I mentioned, Japan's quite centralized, very centralized. Tokyo has an important political grip on the country. Not surprisingly, there's a lot of political and economic power that's concentrated in Tokyo. And in fact, Tokyo has gotten in the post-war, before 1970. The interesting point here, Osaka was the center of business. So in my lifetime, Osaka was the business center of Japan. Before 1970, the majority of large corporations were headquartered in Osaka. After 1970, that flipped. That flipped to Tokyo. Tokyo now is much larger. But really, prior to that, and historically, the center of commerce in Japan was always Osaka. So that's something that people from Osaka don't like that. They're quite jealous of, and understandably so. But that is the loss of that status is keenly felt by people from the Kansai, from the Osaka region. That change in the status of and that concentration of political, economic, and media power. Tokyo has really created this gigantic urban area, and the largest in the world. Tokyo is the largest in population, the largest, still, as 2018, is still probably the largest urban area on the planet. So I want to talk about, in thinking about the size of cities, we've got about 30 minutes to go. Let me just look over this, how much I can present to you here. What I want you to do is to understand, I want you to go over this model. I may have something on the final that may, a little bit that may relate to this. We want to talk about why this explains why cities are of different sizes. And we're going to talk basically about a city, look at 2 cities that the difference is wages. That the difference would be wages, that people travel to the city center to work and to shop. They have a transportation cost that's based on the distance from the city center. So, and that also affects the amount of rent and what they can pay for housing. What we'll see is that this in fact produces results that mirror reality. So it's a very simple model, but it does enable us to say some interesting things about the real world. This is the layout of the model, the assumptions of it, the utility function. There it is Cobb-Douglas. It adds to constant returns. I'm sorry, it's a constant returns model. We have the income constraint that's based on wages. The households purchase housing, a composite good, and they have to commuting costs. So the DI is commuting costs. We have that. I'm going to go over this very quickly. I just want to make sure that, but please go over this. Go over this model carefully sometime over the next couple of weeks. So the result, we solve for the model based on the constraints. We solve for the constraints, and we have the housing price results in the housing price is a function of the distance from the city center. So that the price for housing, the further you get from the city center, what you're willing to pay for housing falls. That's what. And where 1 minus SG is the share of income spent on income spent on housing, and what we have is a fixed size of that. So right, that's fixed. So the thing that varies is distance. The distance increases, the willingness to spend for housing declines. And that's what reality is. The further we get away, the further you go outside of Tokyo, the center of Tokyo, the housing prices fall. It's very easy. It's a very easy, very clear, and some kind of circular. It has like a circular pattern. And in fact, the maximum that housing that you're willing to spend is at the city center. It's maximized at the city center where the distance equals to 0, and there's some minimum value way out. All you have to do is get on a train, go out. I was out visiting a friend out in Chiba last week, a place called Yotsukaido. Yeah, it's out there. I went out there, and yeah, you can see, yeah, land values a lot lower, lot lower land values. Community costs a lot higher. City center, Minato-ku. Everybody wants. This is where people would love to live. It's going to be the highest value, right? At some city center. So that explains it. That's the kind of thing that you should expect to see. Is this kind of what's called a rent gradient? The rent declines. The land rent, the willingness to pay for land declines as you move away from the city center. So that's what we have here. 100% spent on housing in the center. 100% is spent on housing in the center. 100% spent on commuting in the distance. Now that's a little bit. That's not reality, but in fact, at the center of cities, people do spend a higher percentage of their income on housing. That's very clear. That's a very clear empirical. You can demonstrate that empirically. That people spend a higher percentage of their income. People who live in city centers spend a higher percentage of their income than people who live outside of city centers. So this is very much in terms of that. And then what I have is the model talks about why are cities of different sizes. And this is what we're holding the size of housing constant. We've done that in the model. The price of housing is maximized at the city center. The price of housing increases with an increase in the wage. So as wage goes up, the cost of housing goes up, and you observe that. We observe that in reality. We observe in the center of Tokyo. The housing prices are higher. But what's also interesting about this, and this is a very simple model. I'd like you to go through this because it tells you a lot of. One of the great things about simple models that tell you a lot about can tell you a lot about reality. They can tell you a lot about reality because this very simple model. Go through it. It's very. See, you can understand it. You get the size of housing constant, the price of housing is maximized in the city center, the price of housing increases with an increase in wages, we observe that in real life, the percentage of income spent on housing increases with an increase in wages. That's also a very interesting outcome. New York, people live in New York City, they have high wages, but they spend a higher percentage of their income on housing. I know because my daughter lives there, and she spends like 100% of her income on housing because she wants to live in Manhattan. So she spends all of it on housing so she can live in Manhattan, and she Airbnbs it so she can have some money, and she has a rich boyfriend too, so that works. But that's the these are things that you see. These are realities that you see in urban environments. These are real things that this model can tell us about reality. We see this in Tokyo. We see this in a city like New York. Compared with a city like Osaka, a lot lower wages, lower rents, a little bit lower density, much lower housing values, lower percentage of income spent on housing. So those are the kinds of patterns that we see. So here I'm talking about why cities are of different sizes. Essentially, they're different. One of the things that drive there's a number of factors, or several economic factors that can drive it. In this model, what we're looking at is the differences in wages, how wages drive cities in different sizes. And not surprising if the wages in the city 1 are greater than the wages in city 2. City 1 people can afford to pay more. The cost of housing in the city center is higher. There's a bigger population. They pay a higher percentage of their income on housing at the city center than do people in the lower wages. That ends up with a smaller city. You see this is an economic reality. So the very simple model, as I said, I want you to go through this. A very simple model that tells us a lot about some very clear basic patterns that we observe of economic patterns that we observe in urban areas. And as I say, I go through this and I point that out, that this is exactly why you see that you can see in city 1, in this result in city 1, that because the wage is higher, everything else here, you get a result that the same distance from the city center in each city, where the distance is the same, the price of housing is higher in the city with higher wages. It's very clear, it's very simple. And where the location is at the center, let's see, where the price of housing is 0, where the price of housing is 0, it's further out from the center, which means it's a bigger city. Bigger city, you people can live further away from the center, and even though the cost of commuting is high, the wages that they earn by commuting are high enough to justify living further out. And you see that in Tokyo, you see that definitely in a city like Tokyo, New York. People can live incredible distances from the city center and have incredible commutes, absolutely incredible commutes to get to monumental commutes to get to work in these urban areas. You see that in Tokyo. People way out in West Tokyo, living down south of Yokohama, way up in Saitama. These are places where people live. But I know in New York, or I know I have a friend in the U.S. He lives in suburban Philadelphia, and he commutes to New York every day. It's like a 3-hour. It's like a 2.5-hour commute. I think he does it every day. But the commute by car and train to get up to New York, and way tremendous distance. Because what he does, his work is in New York, even though he lives outside of Philadelphia. So these things happen. Now I want to use here. Here's a very important model of in spatial economics. Was done by an economist, an 19th century economist, early 19th century economist named von Deunen, German economist named von Deunen. This is a very famous model. And what he did was he looked around at the urban environment in Germany, and he noticed how the land uses around towns, that the effect of land uses, and he developed a model, a very one of the early using mathematics, economists that used mathematics in order to develop a mathematically disciplined model of an economy. And here talking about a theory of marginal land productivity, It's a theory of marginal land productivity, where he was predicting, what he wanted to show was why you had certain uses, land uses that were closer to city centers, the center of cities, why certain crops were grown near cities, and why other crops were grown further away from cities. So he looked at the environment in Germany, and he realized that, he looked at the pattern, he realized there was a pattern, and developed an economic explanation for the observed pattern. And here, R is land rent. This is the ability to pay. This is what a person using the land can pay, and it's a function, and this is thinking about crops, but we can use this in terms of other land uses. We can use this in terms of other land uses as well. This model is applicable to any kind of urban land use. But here we got yield per unit of land. P is the per unit market price of some product, vegetables, wheat, he had wood. C is the per unit production expenses of the good. Again, there is the yield per unit of land. F is the freight rate per unit of good, unit of distance, and D, the distance to the market. So we use this simple model to explain why certain land uses were located. And what it is that yields that are higher were the value, in terms of value, yield per unit of land, and in terms of market price. So yield times price. We have a high yield and a high price. It's going to locate closer to the city. Lower yield, lower price, some combination, and obviously lowest yield and lowest price per unit in terms of weight located further out. But it can't be too far out because you've got to take it, you've got to transport it to the city center. That's, again, it's an early 19th century model. Obviously the world is much more complex than it was back then. Okay, good. Okay, it's fine. It's not getting all of it, but I won't worry about it. You can look at your So this is the equation, compares the value of the commodity produced against the cost of getting it to the market. And his insight was the value of the land in which the good is produced is a function of the productivity at the location, the weight of the product, and the distance to the market for that product. And we can use these same concepts to say, why are office buildings located near city center? Why are residences tend to be located further out? Why is retail located near high value retail tend to be located near the city center? Why do restaurants in Tokyo locate in certain areas? All of that, even in urban land uses, the model, the essential model is applicable to explaining and understanding land use patterns even in urban areas. So he talks about this, as I say, it's early 19th century, but he looked at the production of various agricultural units, goods, again at that time, fruits, vegetables, dairy products, timber and firewood. That was an important, this tells you how long ago it was. Timber and firewood were important back then. People had to build, they built things with wood, they had to, it was Germany, it's cold in the winter, they needed firewood, they needed grains, you grew grains, well they ate meat, but the cattle had to graze. But the cattle, back then, well, what did you do? What happened when the cattle were ready for market? Well, you walked them to the market. They walked. That's pretty low. It's a high weight and low cost of and a low cost of transport. They just walk the product to market. So at any rate, so that's the so what he noticed there, that the timber and firewood are still important sources of energy. Grain somewhat less valuable per unit of weight than our fruits and vegetables. Dairy products, but relatively light, and they transport reasonably well. Fruits and vegetables and milk are perishable. You can't, even today, you can't ship them In general, unless you have very efficient and a good, what's called a cool chain, you have to be careful about shipping perishable products a long distance. So that still affects, let's say, lettuce, fruits and vegetables that you have that are on sale in the market here. So the result, this is what analysis produced the following land use ring pattern, this kind of ring pattern in terms of land use. And that what happens is what he had was, here's ring 1, that was fruits and vegetables, ring 2 was the timber, ring 3 was grain, and ring 4 was for cattle. So that's what he showed, was that he could go around to different towns and cities in Germany, and he could observe something, a pattern that was similar. He observed this kind of circular pattern. And what it is a circular market area around a town, the town at the center, circular pattern, as long as if everything is the same in all directions. Well, that's what you observe. We can observe something like that in the real world. This is an example of von Thunen's analysis. This is when you look, you run these numbers. You put this on a spreadsheet. You have yields for 3 crops: high yield, medium, low yield, high price, higher price, highest price. So this kind of price, production costs, transport costs, and you can work out and see where each product is located. In this example, what this means is this crop, for example, it has the highest yield, but you have to have it close, because if it's located too far away, the transport cost is too high. It's not worth bringing to market. So beyond a certain point, the bid is 0. If it's negative, the use will bid negative. It's a negative bid. This is what's called a land use, a land bid, land rent. These are bids. That's what a user of the land is willing to pay. And that's exactly what happens in urban areas. Why do offices located in the city center? Because people are willing to pay. They get more value out of being in the city center. That's why they're there. That's why their rents are higher. This is the same reason as why the crops want to locate. In this example, the crop locates the closest to the city center. The bid falls off the most rapidly. Crop B out to this distance, crop C. And then you can also see where is the outbidding. Then you look and you say, okay, crop A outbids 1 kilometer away, crop B outbids at 2 kilometers, and 3 kilometers, and 4, and 5, 6. But at 7 kilometers, then crop C. Crops all the way out. Crop C out to here, 16 kilometers out. Beyond that, there's no land use. That's what this means. If it's negative, there's no bid. It's a negative bid. Nobody wants to be there. The land has no value. And that's where land values essentially come from. That's why land is valued a certain amount, because that's the use that people have, what people are willing to pay. If it's too far away, they're not willing to pay anything. Just go far enough outside of Tokyo, it only takes maybe an hour and a half or so. You're getting out to places that's almost, it's not the bidding, the land, the value of land, it gets pretty low. It gets pretty low quite quickly out there. And so that's what I'm talking about here. This is one of the wonderful map of that was the Edo era map. The interesting thing was that this is north of the top. That's north there. I think that was red. It was turned on. Yeah, it was turned on its side. The map was turned on its side. But there's the Imperial Palace. All of this. I think I talked about this last week, and that's what I did. And you can see there's a lot of features that you can see that still are present in even today. that existed at that time. One of the interesting things about this city is the, and in terms of land rent, has anybody thought about why the center of Tokyo is located? Did anybody know why the center of Tokyo is where it is? Anybody?
Chiyoda.
Right, but why? Why is it there? Why is the Imperial Palace located right there? Any idea?
For rivers.
The rivers, that's one. The rivers and if you go there, and I really suggest, go to the palace grounds and you walk. Here's the Imperial Palace. This is open to the public, this area. Has anybody been in here? Anybody ever been in? Anybody in the class been here? This is worth going. And this is worth going. I'll tell you why. Because walk. There is the top. Anybody? Nobody's been there.
Grave.
No. That's the top of. That's the highest point. That is the highest point in the Imperial Palace area. That's about 29 meters above sea level. That is this point. They built it. I think it's artificially built up a little bit, but not that much. That point is almost 30 meters high. That's very strategic. That is a point where you get above sea level. Go there, stand on there, and you can just see and imagine that there's no city. It's an incredible view. You could see for kilometers. It's incredibly strategic location. Incredibly strategic. You will learn a lot about this city, and if you go to that spot, I really recommend that if you go there, you stand on that spot, and you'll realize this is why they built this right here, because this is as close as you can get. You're 30 meters above sea level. The city, 30 meters, you have to go well inland. But that point, it's almost at the water. It's right, all those rivers, and you have a point that's almost 30 meters high. Fantastic location, fantastic natural location to put that kind of a view. Tremendous view near the coast, near the Sumidagawa, the Sumida River, all of the rivers to live, so you can build the moats around. Absolutely perfect place. That's why the center of the city is started in that location. And the other thing is stand there and you look in the Bancho area. You know the Bancho area? The Ichibancho, Nibancho, Sanbancho.
What station is the nearest?
That is like Hanzomon.
Hanzomon.
The Hanzomon, right here. This is the Bancho. It's a very important part of the history of the city. Is this was a lot of the daimyo. This was the lived here, and the thing you can see is what they did. They put the Imperial Palace. They put their. This is about level. This is about 30 meters. A lot. Some hilly, but it's higher. It's right behind. He put his friends at his back. The emperor they put their friends at the back. It's very strategic. It's a very, very strategic location. And today, this is one of the highest incomes.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the highest incomes, and that's why. This is probably the highest residential. Old money, it's old. But as I say, go to that spot. You'll understand a lot about the city. You'll understand a lot about the city and why it's where it is. And historically, if you go to that spot. Now, that's I spent an incredible amount of time making that map, I assure you. I never would go through it again. But I took, this gives you an idea that the green, this was based on 2015, 2016. That is the Bancho is like right here. That's the Bancho. That's some of the highest. That's the highest residential, and you can see the rings, the lower land values in a ring, and it favors the southwest. The reason is that this area, here's the Koto, East Tokyo, was historically very floodplain until the 1970s, 60s, 1970s. It was prone to floods. That started to change, but this has historically been. You can see that ring, the ring definitely favoring in that direction from the city center. It's very clear from there. So that's on this map. The red, that's commercial. That's the city center. This is the office and retail. The Ginza right in there. So that is. We've got 3 minutes to go. That's I'm going to end the lecture. That is the last slide. That's the end of the lecture. This is my last lecture here at Aoyama. I'm leaving the university. I'm not coming back next year to teach. I'm leaving with a bit of a heavy heart. I have a feeling like there's some unfinished work here, but things have. In terms of personally, I need to focus on my consulting business, so I'm going to be doing that going forward. But I've had this has been a tremendous experience, and it's been a wonderful experience working with you. This has meant a lot to me. Hopefully, in some way, I can continue. I've really enjoyed doing this work. I see. I felt like I've been a part of some changes. I think that eventually there are going to be changes. It's probably not time yet for those changes at the university here. So I wanted to, as part of that, I wanted to thank Dr. Uchiyama, who's been the chairman of the department, who's absolutely been tremendous support. He's been very, very kind in his support of my work. Here, very, very supportive and very, very kind. I really, it was a real pleasure and a privilege to work under him and to have you people as young people, as students. You've done a lot for me. I've learned a lot and been inspired by you, and in that sense, I'm walking away having learned a lot, and I feel a lot richer, not financially, but a lot personally, a lot richer for having had this experience with high quality students like everybody here. I am leaving the door open. That's if something different comes up, I'm leaving that. Certainly, please feel free if I can be a help to you in your professional work. Please feel free to stay in touch with me. I'd be delighted to continue to hear from you. I also wanted to thank a gentleman you probably have not met. His name is Dr. Oda, Hiroshi Oda. He's retired, he's 78 years old, so he's been out of the university for some time. He was tremendous supportive, tremendously supportive of my being here, and he was really distressed to hear that I'm leaving. He's a bit in ailing health, and certainly my colleagues in the United States. He's quite internationally known and very, very respected in my field. Are very concerned about him. I'm going to go see him tomorrow. As I say, he's been a wonderful, supportive person. And very, very high caliber person who loves this university, loves this department, and really appreciated the work that I did here. So I'm going to close with that, and thank you, each one of you personally, for this class and for having been my students. I'm really grateful for that. Our final, I'm going to send out to you on Friday evening, the February 3rd. Those of you who were late, please watch. I wish you had been here earlier. That is some important things on the lecture. I think it's very, very important. The things that I went through, we covered some important points. that needed to be made about question 22 that I want to. So please, if you were not here, go over that carefully. If you, all final work is due 1 week. I think the last. And does anybody? I have this for the extra credit. If any, I can give this. If anybody wants this, I can send this out. But if you're interested, here I'll leave that for right. If you want, come and pick that up. If you don't, I'll take that out. But if you call this an extra credit, so all of that is due. I've got. Just going to be in contact with you to make sure that I've got everything from you, all of your work. So, as I say, you have another week to turn that in. So this is my last lecture here. Thank you very much.